Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 153 of my modded Factorio playthrough. It looks like we're at the point where we can start working on module components. We've got some of the research done. We already researched the modules lab, and we needed those crystal splinters in order to make these circuit boards. And there's one more research we can do for module components. It unlocks some more boards here. The harmonic crystal splinters go into pollution cleaning and pollution producing, if you want to do that. And it creates the other module components. The module case, the aluminum and plastic, the main board, and the contact that uses silver. So we should probably grab that. But as a review, as things go further, you can see that now we need these circuit boards in order to actually research modules. So we need to start building all of these various module components. Let's let that research happen for a second. We need to plan things in Hellmod, but one thing I noticed is that this setup actually stopped working because it got filled up on purified water. So I guess there isn't a clarifier for this extra purified water. And we can put one in there. But I was also thinking that this setup finds itself short on hydrogen sometimes, especially when the factory isn't running very much. How about let's set up an electrolyzer here to electrolyze away the water in case it gets too high. Well, the modules got done already. That was fast. A simple overflow valve should be fine here. I guess it depends on exactly how this is set up. So we gotta follow this water. So it's being pumped into the other system there, and pumped into the other system right here. I'm going to check the actual numbers on there to make sure it's not overloading anything. If it's under 45k, but it's actually going into a smaller petrochem tank, so that number is not correct. Should be more like 18,000. So that's been overloading this system. Probably doesn't matter too much because I don't think it would have been able to clarify away any wastewater, but having that filled to the max is definitely not desirable. What about this one over here? That one's probably fine. Yeah, I guess it was copy pasted over there, so that's why that didn't work. So that overflow valve should work pretty well. And we could do the fast electrolysis, but that seems kind of unnecessary for just one machine dealing with the electrodes and all of that. So let's just do the standard kind. And it's already filling up. We can hook these up to everything else. And that'll help get rid of that extra water and hopefully not clog this system. We might find ourselves overloaded on oxygen, ironically. But we'll deal with that later. I just want to make sure this fertilizer production continues, because that is what's creating our gardens. So that needs to keep going pretty much continuously as long as it possibly can. Sometimes it'll run out of resources and that's how it is, but gotta do what we can. Also, I adjusted the sound on these chemical plants a little bit, so hopefully they're a little more tolerable. And I increased the health on these depots to 450. So now you can kind of ran into them, at least a little bit. Can't really womp on them, but I don't think they would have survived that impact before. So less explosions, hopefully. What was that doing? Okay. It's basically cleared it down. Yep, now it's caught up. Awesome. We'll have to keep an eye on oxygen. I doubt this is going to produce enough oxygen to actually clog it up. So we need to plan for modules. There's a couple different kinds we can make. We can make speed modules, which are really nice. Increase the speed of machine by some percent, but increases the energy consumption by a lesser percent. So it's basically just free speed. And you should slam a bunch of these in any given machine, just make the setup smaller and help UPS. And if you've got extra spaces, you can throw efficiency modules in there just to reduce energy consumption with no downside. And then productivity, where increase energy consumption, decrease speed, increased pollution, but you get a productivity increase, so free materials. So anytime you can put that in a machine, it's probably worth it. And then if you've got extra spaces and you feel like it, you could decrease or increase pollution if that's what you want. I think there's one more module type that's not showing up, the agricultural ones. Let's see what they're locked behind. Okay, so we just have to... It's basically a combined module that we have to do the efficiency and productivity first. But you put in alien plant life, that's something we'll probably have to truck down there. And you can use these agricultural modules to improve the productivity of farms, which would come in handy right now, waiting on all of those gardens. So we don't know exactly which modules we'd want to produce, but we should probably plan for the big three of speed, efficiency, and productivity. And then these other ones, we'll set up the processes and they'll be made as required. So in the beginning, we will be able to do the first tier, and then the second tier, which just requires more boards. But to get to tier 3, we're going to need the speed logic boards, which come from modules 2. And that's the next tier of electronics, and the next tier of crystal shards as well. So that's going to be a bit in the future, as you can see. Let's see, just double checking this is working. It seems like it is. And how are the gardens doing? Well, not much, but it looks like the drones are on the way with the fertilizer to help the process continue. So it's probably working all right. But let's plan for these modules. Probably need to enable the hidden ones here, the disabled ones. So you see the recipe for all these is basically the same, just a little bit of solder and the various components. So we'll just do the tier 2, which comes from tier 1, and the same for efficiency, and the same for productivity. And we need a number. We'll have to figure it out in a second. Let's just do 1, because we're basically going to set this up to use all of the crystals that we've made, and that's the fastest we'll be able to make this stuff. So we'll just set it to 1 for now, which is going to create all the various components. But we need to make the blue boards from stuff, yellow boards from stuff, and the red ones from stuff. So now we come back out here and we have the number of crystals that we would need for this setup. So since it's 3, it means we can make 5 of these per second, which now uses 15 crystals. And that's going to be the maximum speed that we can make this stuff. Now, in the event that we're not making modules, we will still be making these circuit boards available, which is the component necessary for various research. And as you go down the list, even to stuff that's really high tier, it still uses the same basic boards for research, just in enormous quantities. So if you're wondering, do you really need 15 crystals a second? It's like, well, no, but that's 8,000 researches using 4 of each of these boards. So you kind of do need a lot of them. So it's not necessarily for modules, but it's the research that goes into modules. So that's why this setup is trying to maximize the use of all of these crystals. So now we want to figure out exactly how we're going to build all of these things. Because you see that we're going to require 90 electronic components and 90 transistors to do this at full speed. I don't even know if we could put that out. But the concern is you don't necessarily just want to make 90 of each of these, because then that's 6 belts on the bus just of components. So components are really not something you want to bus. You want to produce them right at the point of where they're needed, which is always a little frustrating, but it's much more efficient. So the visual example is how we have our circuit set up here, where instead of busing these components, they are built right next to the place that they are consumed. And then if you need a bigger setup, just keep doing it again and again and again. So basically the limiting factor is that belt speed on how big any of these setups can be. And then when you look at the bus, it's pretty clean and doesn't have tons of belts of all of these electronic components. It gets even worse with like module contacts. So for each of these setups, we'll probably want to produce all of these basic components locally. Well, with the exception of perhaps like module cases and main boards, because we only need 15 of those. That's probably something that could be produced on a bus system here since it's so straightforward to do. And 200 machines. Although electronics machines? No? Okay. No electronics assemblers. Just 200 assembly machines. Of course, there's no way we'll ever be able to supply that much aluminum for that. It's just not happening. I think the most we can do is like 30 or something. Yeah. So that's not going to happen. But we'll probably build it to that scale just to prepare for the future. And we can make these main boards too. And that's still a fairly large scale, but it's smaller. And we can do things like copper plates from assembling machines, taking it off of the coils. So let's look at anything else we might need for this. Basically, the contacts. So we hit contacts and boom, enormous numbers all around, as you can see here. Kind of worried that that's too big, because we do need modules, but we don't need them at a rate of 5 per second. Because things like speed modules, they go into random stuff, but in fairly small quantities. And the things it does go into that is a large quantities, like personal teleport, that's not something that you're producing on a bus, that's just for your character. So it's fine to grab a stack of those just to craft an item. And they go into other various parts, and yeah, you need a fairly large number, but you could just build those over time and put them in a chest. And it keeps going down, goes into random things that you need. But it isn't until you get to the end game where you start needing a whole bunch of these to build a spaceship. So, I don't think we need to use all of the crystals, at least for making the modules. We still want to use all of the crystals to make these circuit boards for the purposes of research, but the actual modules, I don't think we need to make them nearly this fast. So maybe like 1 per second. Oh yeah, even at 1 per second, these are still pretty big numbers, but it just got a lot more reasonable. Because as big as this factory is, it's not nearly big enough to do that stuff at that kind of speed. So what does that change for the numbers here? Okay, now module cases is 40, and we can actually put out that much aluminum. Okay, I'm much more happy with that number there. So to complete each one of these setups, we need to make sure that we're adding in the assembling machines to chop them down from their coil form for what the machine needs. And the silver isn't in coils right now, so we need to do that for each setup. We will need to double check our ferric chloride production because we are also using it for making white circuits, so the requirement here may not be enough. But it looks like we need to worry about these other components, which are probably going to use more of that ferric chloride here. So the blue boards need the white basic boards. Yeah, more ferric chloride, more phenolic boards. However, because we lowered those output numbers, it looks like we don't need nearly as many electronic components. So we still may not want to put that on the bus, but we can produce it at one location and then send it to this entire module setup to make it a little easier to deal with. So we're not just doing something like this where we're separating it into each individual machine. We might be able to in the sense where if we only need 9 module contacts, actually, then that's 27, and that's something that can be made in a central location, so there's just smaller, more compact setup. So let's do the electronics components for the whole thing and set up the coil, and then transistors for the whole thing, and those are all the components that we need there. The solder requirement is also quite low for this whole setup, so we could probably remove those too. Just put that on one central thing. Oh yeah. It's amazing what happens when you make the numbers smaller. So because of that, we probably can do all of these basic boards together as well. Okay. I think it's pretty good. You kind of can check your work by looking at the inputs and making sure that all of the inputs are the lowest level, most compacted versions of their components. So everything is in a coil or basic boards, and the most important thing is you need to think of your logistic network. So all of this stuff is on the logistic network or a train or something, and it's already being produced somewhere else. So we need to figure out our setup here. Well, before we can even make modules, we need to make these circuit boards and build the labs to research them. Okay, I noticed this setup turned off, but now it turned off because no hydrogen as opposed to being clogged on water. And it is what it is. The second we hook all this stuff up, we're going to be swimming in resources again. So I'm not worried. The first thing we need to do is to make these basic module boards. And that requires phenolic boards, which are already being delivered up there. So we can just build this setup, make it look nice, and pick it up with the bots. And it's actually quite small. Just 10 electronic assemblers here and 2 assembling machines supplying the resources. And it looks like that we won't be inserter limited because we have a combination of 3 inputs and 1 output, which means all sides of the electronic assembler will be used. That's something you always want to think about with these because they're so small that they only have room for a couple of things. And actually, because of that ferric chloride input, it's even less. Although we can make it work by just sort of spacing them out like this, and then having an underground go and connect other machines here. Yeah, it's actually going to be a little complicated, but it should work okay. So let's have the inputs be in the middle here, and it's going to be compact enough to where we can't just smash them next to each other because we need these power poles to reach, so it's going to be not particularly dense, at least in the sense of the machines. All the spaces are going to be used by things. Then we'll have the output go on the side, and they'll probably want to go the opposite direction here. And actually, wait, we might be able to make this work after all. If we put these, yeah, like right up here. Let's get a power pole here to make sure that everything works. Then we'll do inserter, inserter, and then another near side. Something like that. We need 10 total machines. We'll have to connect that fluid from somewhere, but that'll be easy enough on the outside here. Just whatever side makes the most sense. We have an input necessary of the metals, which we can do something like this. One side can be copper, the other side will be tin. It says 1, but always makes me nervous when it's an exact number there. I feel like there's some rounding involved, so let's use a red inserter. One thing we can do is space this out, like right here. Make this like a long-handed inserter. This a regular one, so the output can be there. And then the input will actually be like right here. And it will merge from above. And then we can have the input and the input right there. And the outputs will go up there. So that'll produce the basic module boards, 9 per second. And from there we need to make the circuit board versions, but they will use all of these components that are made from some other location. Since it's only a couple of machines each, we probably can put the solder coil cutter right there. But we'll also need to do the electronics components, which isn't that large, but it does require some consideration. I don't know if we'll be able to copy something we've already done. In a way, I kind of want to, because we need 18 per second. This produces way more than 18. The general setup is basically the same. So there's no reason to reinvent the wheel here, where we can just plop this in here and then adjust it for the size that we need. It did just occur to me that this setup is too small because we're not using all of our crystals. It's being lined up with our module output, but not the crystal output. So we probably want to unlink this and set all these to 15, which is going to make the numbers bigger. Oh yeah. Doing that completely changes how the setup needs to be done. Sigh. Well, these numbers are big enough now to where putting it on the bus is going to be problematic for pretty much all of these things. So they need to be done nearby these circuit boards. So we've got to make the module boards. And in fact, because this is going to be a little complicated, let's just do a new line here. Say we want 15. So we can grab these, make them from the plates, then come back out here, make the solder from the coil, come back again, then we'll do the electronic components, which now that the number is exactly 30, it's going to be basically an identical copy to what we have above, except that we'll have to upgrade the machines to the faster version. But that's what it's going to look like. And the numbers seem okay if this is multiplied by 3. It's just a little annoying. I knew everything was going too smoothly. There was something I was missing. Well, this setup is basically the same, just more of it. We need 16.7. So 4, 8, 12, 16, and 20, and we'll cut the end of it off. But it's basically that, and since this is going to be a single unified setup, probably should move it around, and since these things can't be flipped, do you want them to be up or down? Well, I suppose it doesn't really matter, since they're more or less the same size on either side here. I'll just make it down then, since that's what we're doing here. So let's move this down and put it like over here. So let's do the boards now, which we can line up in here. Actually, let's line it up a couple spaces over. Makes sense. Also the 16.7. It almost makes you want to do direct insertion, but with the amount of resources that are going into this, I think it would be too complicated for that. And actually, because the size is bigger, we probably need to copy this on each side like this. So that's 8. And then 16. Then the 18. Something like that, but since the resources are coming from different directions, let's do the module boards and the solder on one belt. And that's actually exactly a red belt, but we do have a problem where the electronics components requires quite a bit. So we'd probably need to set up the middle to be electronics components only. Actually, since the central belts are shared by both machines, we can probably do the lesser needed materials in the middle, where the crystals can come down the middle, white boards and solder can come in through there, and now that these belts on the outside are split in half, it gives us more freedom, because we need 30 of each type. Well, they can be combined somewhere on the outside right here, where it's 15, 15, giving the 30 right here. So it's crystals coming in there, and yeah, this is kind of a little tricky. But we'll have solder and basic boards coming in through there. Both types of electronics components on here. And then the output, blue boards, will go up there to the bus. Okay, this thing's starting to come together here. So we have our output of 15 per second of these white boards, and then we need 15 per second of the solder. which requires a single assembling machine, which creates our output right here, which will line up with the output of this side. So now we can kind of pick this up and put it in here, although the alignment is frustratingly a tiny bit off. So pick everything up again and get it lined up just perfect. We do need to leave room for some of the fluid to get out of here. And it looks like it's probably going to be coming in from the side here. So we'll hook that up, and the actual pipe will probably be down here somewhere. Although I suppose this whole setup would be more compact if this was placed on this side instead. Now it's just electronics components. So let's see if we can get this set up. And then we need to grab this last one here. And we have our red output, which we also need to find a way of combining in here. And it can go in something like that. And I think that covers the whole thing. We have our basic module boards here, which are getting their plates from up here and phenolic boards from somewhere else. Solder coils coming in there. Splinters are coming in through there. And then the production of electronic components swing in through there. And these are copies of other things, so they should work. I think that is going to be the setup, which is going to produce 15 circuit boards a second. And since there's 5 board types, we will need this 5 times. So let's pick everything up. And then we can check our inventory to make sure we have enough for everything. So if we need 5 of these setups, we can just take a look at these numbers and multiply them by 5 to figure out what we need. For things you need smaller amounts of, it's not that big a deal. But for things like belts, you definitely want to know this ahead of time, because that is 2,000 belts, which is not nothing. Probably want to do a check of our ferric chloride output real quick, just to make sure it's in the ballpark here. Because we're going to need 15 for the modules, and then 18.8 times 5 for everything else. So we need 109. What kind of output do we have? Well, those machines could be upgraded. Yeah, more or less enough. It's probably going to fall behind, but at least on the surface, it seems like we've got enough. So, I think we're good. Let's go up there and start building. One thing we kind of need to take care of real quick is to make sure that the train is fueled up. Because it doesn't really have any fuel here. And I was originally thinking, why bother with fuel? But it might be better to just put fuel at every single train stop, just to make sure the trains get fuel, and it's not as much of a logistic problem as it might seem when you got drone path nearby to just distribute the resources where they need to go. So it could probably come in something like this, and we'll need some corner inserters to fuel all these trains. Then we need a request depot. Try to line it up the best we can. Rocket boosters. It'll take forever to fill up, but it'll eventually get there. Hopefully this just avoids any complication of trying to figure out, okay, which train stations do fuel and which ones don't. To just kind of basically give fuel to all train stations. Because it gets a little logistically complicated when you have LTN and non-LTN trains kind of sharing the same station group, which is kind of what's happening here. So by doing that, that should apply fuel to all the trains. And that's it for this episode. On the next one, we're going to build module boards and plan for the other components that go into modules. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.